Oh, anything else? Is that it?
Yeah.
Yes. Right. This Press the New Horizons this Friday. Who is she? A lady?
Laura Sayers.
Oh, right. Don't know.
Walking.
What?
She's had a walking. Oh.
What? Walking wardrobe? Oh, right, I see.
Not a walking possession.
What is it? Laura Sayers? A walking. Ascension. Right. Got it. Thanks for that.
Just heard over there. That's so funny.
Right, good evening. If you do have a mobile phone, if you'd like to put it on silent, please. Thank you. Right, a massive welcome to our last speaker before the summer break, Michael O'Deara, with Natural Law, the Rise of the Sovereign Individual and Jumping the Citizenship. Michael reminds us of propaganda and the sheer amount of information and entertainment that exists that keeps us from properly functioning and divides us, thereby weakening and confusing us, making us easier to control. He also touches on the universal community trust, explaining what it is, how it came about. He's a co-producer of the forthcoming film, which is guaranteed to rattle a lot of cages, The Great British Mortgage Swindle, and explores what it is to approach the idea of being a sovereign individual. Please welcome Michael O'Deara.
Yeah, good evening, and thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks to Alex and Rob for inviting me here tonight. Absolute pleasure, and I understand that this is the last of the season, so this is like kind of school's out, isn't it? This is the last lesson before the long summer break. I'd just like to add something there to what I'm going to talk about this evening. In the second half, I'm going to focus particularly on the Great British Mortgage Swindle, because, and if you could just give me a quick show of hands, that'd be great. I'd like an idea just how many people here have or believe they have a mortgage. Right, so that's probably getting on for 50%. And other people have... has anyone actually paid off their mortgage? Well, congratulations in a way, but on the other hand, my commiserations. I'll explain as we go as to why that might be the case. Nevertheless, before I get into this stuff about natural law and dropping the citizenship and the stuff that we've been doing with UCT, I would just like us to focus on how huge the Great British Mortgage Swindle is. It affects every aspect of society, everyone's life. You know, how many people are paying up 50% upwards of their income on just keeping a roof over their heads? And it's increasingly hard for people to keep up with the fake payments, as it were. Well, as it is, they are factually fake. No one owes anything to the banks, as I'm sure many of you here have come to the realisation of. So this evening's talk is going to be a bit of a sprint, if you like, through history. I'm going to take us way back into the mist of time, about to 400 BC. And then I'm going to bring us up to the Norman Conquest, the introduction of the mortgage through the Jewish moneylenders who came in with William the Bastard to give him his correct title, and the subsequent carnage that's been building up. You know, the Great British Mortgage Swindle has not just been going on for the last 50 years, 60, 70 years or so. It's been going on since effectively 1066, since the time the Jewish moneylenders, who were what you might call cash rich and land poor, effected an agreement with the Iceni peoples of Norfolk, who were land rich and cash poor, for a mortgage on their properties, and that was, that's a thousand years ago. So I'm going to touch on that. But one of the things I want to start off with this evening is the baseline, which is that each and every one of us here is sovereign. That means no one comes between you and your creator, not without your consent anyway. when I talk about creator, I mean, I'm not saying I've not become a born-again Christian or anything like that, but I have come to a great appreciation of some of the teachings and some of the works, the books in the Bible, stuff that I shied away from when I was a youngster, but now it's stuff that I increasingly just cannot ignore it, because it rings true with what I understand. This evening I'm going to be speaking more perhaps than going in and digging out the slides, because I want to actually just sometimes it's important for us to sit and just listen to someone talking who's got something to say. And I'm humbly suggesting to you this evening, I have got something to say. The word sovereign, for instance, is a simple enough concept, and it means beyond rule. He who, if you look at the definition of it, it simply means an individual who is beyond rule. When I was being dragged up in Huddersfield as a child, when I did something daft, often the phrase my dad might say to me something like, you haven't got the common sense you were born with, lad. And I think a lot of people have heard that expression. And you get to think about, well, what is this common sense? I would argue your common sense is your divine ability to see through whatever scam or whatever deception is being played upon you. That is your common sense. And the great British people have it in abundance. I noticed earlier Rob was referring to, I think he called himself an Englishman. I may have recalled, in the past, I may have called myself an Englishman, but nowadays I'm calling myself a native indigenous Briton, because that's what I am. And that term Britain is not just exclusive to mainland Britain, it also includes, it's basically the islands of the British Isles. That's what I'm equating it to. So if we've got anyone here who's particularly, strongly viewed about their indigenous nature, whether they're Irish or whatever, that's fine. But I'm just kind of zooming out a bit and looking at us all on these lands. And these lands are increasing. This is the name of the game. It's been the name of the game for over 1,000 years now. It's all about the land. And I know from speaking to Rob this evening, there are real concerns about what fracking and gas storage is doing to the lands up here in the northwest. So the game unfolds, and it's always about the land. When I talk about existing under God's law, if you like, that's simply natural law. It's divine law that we can't avoid it. Some might call it natural law, which is simply defined as inherent, having a basis in nature, reality and truth, not made or caused by mankind. In other words, all the thousands of statutory acts of parliament and legislation, they don't affect you, because if you're truly acting under a natural law, it can be summed up with us: cause no harm, take no shit, and that's it. Everyone's free to do it as they wish to do, as long as they don't cause harm to anyone else, or you might say to the planet or the environment as well. And a law, for the purposes of this, is defined as something which exists, it's immutable, it exists beyond the opinion of an individual. We're all subject to the laws of nature, for instance. And I would say that being the divine creatures we are, we're all subject to divine law. Which is why conflict occurs when someone steps between the individual, a person who is claiming authority over the other individual, or presenting them with a man-made law that they believe applies to them. And increasingly, I'm delighted to hear more and more people are waking up to this. This unhealthy view that many of us have been brought up with about authority figures. And we all know people who will question the authority of others, but there's not enough of it going on, because there's not enough people these days applying the common sense. Why aren't they applying the common sense? Well, distractions in the shape of the media, and I go into some of these issues on my website, by the way, which is roguemail.org. The media, the financial controls, the puppet show that we know as politics, and all that ensues from that. The monarchy, who owns the land, who's really in charge, And that's a very interesting question. Who is ultimately in charge of all this? This if we identify it as a global conspiracy, is it that, or is it really a combination of different groups, each vying for attention and for supremacy? Whatever's going on, there's masses of deception going on, and that's why I'm trying to this evening just simplify things down into their basic essence, if you will. There's a quote here from a court case featuring the famous Lord Denning, and it says this: blind unquestioning obedience is the law of tyrants and of slaves. It does not yet flourish on English soil. Well, you could substitute that for British soil. Arrested with or without a warrant, the subject is entitled to know why he is deprived of his freedom, if only in order that he may, without a moment's delay, take such steps as will enable him to regain. That's from a book by Lord Denning called Freedom Under the Law. And he was someone who championed the rights of the common man. And, you know, if we think of the common man, we think of this common sense again. Common sense is the innate understanding that arises in man when he is faced with an issue or situation that and is founded in intuitive reason. Common law, insofar as it depends on the ability to reason, is founded upon common sense. That which is right or wrong can be determined by the reasonable, in other words, those capable of reasoning using their minds. Now, Rob mentioned the Universal Community Trust. The Universal Community Trust is simply a voluntary association of indigenous peoples who are acting under what we are terming now anarcho-nations, or some say micro-nations. The treaty that we've entered into is the Treaty of Universal Community Trust, and it's basically, as I've pointed out before, do no harm, take no shit. There's more to it than that, and you can go online and watch the entire thing. I think it's called The Fraud of English History and the Rise of UCT, which takes you into it. We've got the website is universalcommunitytrust.net, as I recall, and you'll find on there a group of communities that have all entered into the treaty. Now, this treaty was inspired. We didn't just pluck it out of thin air. We're going back now into the mists of time. It was inspired by the works of an ancient British king called Molmutius, or Molmud, Moelmud. We could have the this slide here is an illustration of the legend of King Arthur, and I'm going to be touching on. Could I just have the next slide? Oh, I've got this, haven't I? Sorry. This is some of this is based on the work of these two maverick, superb historians, Alan Wilson and Baron Blackett, who identified that there were actually two King Arthurs who existed a number of years apart from each other. Now, one of the things about British society 1400 years ago plus was that there wasn't just one king, there were a number of rexes, and the rexes were regarded as being below the people. They weren't self-appointed. They were chosen by the people to represent their interests, and they had to do what the people demanded of them. But from that time, and in that time, we have these stories of these heroes that rose up. Some of them have become clouded in history, and I would say that Molmud is perhaps a great British hero that's been hidden, whereas the versions of the King Arthur legends that we have are based in truth, from what I understand through the work of Wilson and Blackett. Those, I mean, it's provable. The genealogies of the British kings exist, and you can work out who these Arthurs were and how they were based in Wales. The Welsh being, according to their research, the ancient Britons. They're not really Welsh. Welsh, remember, just means foreigner. They're actually the ancient Britons. And Molmutius was known as being the first one who codified the laws of Britain. And one of them that struck me at the time, because I had issues with DVLA, and I won't go into that now because that's a whole other story. But at that time, for instance, the highways were a place of sanctuary. So if you got on the highway and you were being chased, that was it. In theory, you were safe. Just like nowadays, someone might claim sanctuary in a church or in the Ecuadorian embassy, for instance. So I'm just going to touch on the Mamertine law, and it's there. It's been hidden, like so many things have been hidden from us, you know. And you know, it's kind of tragic in a way that youngsters don't get taught this ancient British history at school. They're working under the false impression that history only began with the Romans, you know, which totally overlooks the fact that there was a sophisticated, thriving nation or nations on these lands prior to that. The aristocracy of Europe used to send their offspring to be educated at I think there were 30 British universities, and this is, you know, 2,000 years ago. Momitius, as I say, codified the laws of the land, and when we were drawing up the Treaty of Universal Community Trust, we found that those laws, which can be found in the, and a lot of them can be found in the ancient British Triads as well, whereby, you know, everything's written in threes as a way of memorising it. And of course, at that time, it was the spoken word that many people relied upon. Writing was largely the preserve of the educated and the elites, but you know, the Druids and the bards of Britain would learn things off huge reams of information off by heart. And it would often rhyme, and it was written in threes, and these became known as the Triads. So we took those and we adapted them, although they didn't need much adaptation for our times, for the times we live in now. And I'm not going to read them all out, but I'll just pick a few out for your edification. One of the things I also need to mention is that all these laws obviously predate the Magna Carta. Some people quite rightly rely on the Magna Carta and its central tenets, but they tend to neglect how the Magna Carta, with the right to a fair trial, the right to a trial by jury, was not something that was invented by Alfred the Great, who was a Saxon king. These were ancient. The jury, the tradition of the jury, is an ancient British tradition, and it was here long before the Saxons came into these lands. Again, tragedy that we don't learn these things at school. I wonder why those who write the curriculums don't conveniently overlook all this stuff. So, as I say, the ancient laws of these lands were codified under Divinal Molmud, or Momitius, as some might call him, and we would do our perhaps have a look at them because they are relevant to the situation that we're in now. Just bear with me while I find them. The basic requirements and procedures. This is from a booklet I put together for organising a common law grand jury under Universal Community Trust, and you can download this off my website. It's available for free, and it's just like a guide for helping people to organise grand juries under common law. I'll touch on that later, but this summarises perhaps what I'm saying about Divinal Molmud. The basic requirements and procedures for a common law grand jury, as put forward by Bill Thornton, hold good to these islands, but may need some modifying on the basis of their omission of Mamertine law and undue reliance on the nullity known as Magna Carta. I'll revise that now because I don't think Magna Carta is a nullity, but at the time I did. It needs changing. Once again, and for the avoidance of any doubt, the author emphatically draws the reader's attention to the factual origins of the trial by jury as being, in its essence, wholly founded in the customs, protections and practices of the ancient British peoples of these lands.